Lena was excited to start school. She had her new backpack, shiny shoes, and a big smile on her face as she walked into the schoolyard. She had so many plans for her first day. But she never expected what would happen next. It was the first day of a brand new school year. Lena was in a new class with a new teacher, and she was feeling nervous. Her mom, Mrs. Wilson, kissed her goodbye and told her to have a great day. But before she left, she whispered, "Remember, Lena, if anything strange happens, you tell me." Lena nodded, but she wasn't sure what her mom meant by that. She had no idea that this school year would be very different from the others. The bell rang, and everyone went inside. The classroom was bright and cheerful, with colorful posters on the walls. But something about the room felt off to Lena. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she felt a chill in the air, like someone was watching her. Lena sat down at her desk, next to a girl named Zoe. Zoe seemed nice, but she had a strange way of looking at Lena, like she was hiding a secret. Lena didn't like it, but she smiled anyway, hoping to make a new friend. As the day went on, Lena noticed that Zoe kept whispering to the other kids. Whenever Lena looked over, Zoe quickly turned away. It made Lena feel uncomfortable, like something was wrong. But she didn't want to be rude, so she kept quiet. After school, when Lena came home, she told her mom about Zoe. "She's kind of strange, Mom," Lena said, nervously. "She keeps whispering and looking at me weird." Mrs. Wilson frowned. "That doesn't sound good, Lena. I think we should keep an eye on it." The next day, Lena was determined to have a better day. She told herself not to worry about Zoe. But things only got stranger. During recess, Lena went outside to play with her best friend, Mia. But as soon as they started playing, Zoe came over. She stared at Lena, and then, without warning, she grabbed Lena's hand. "Come with me," Zoe whispered urgently. "You need to see something." Lena's heart raced. She didn't want to follow Zoe, but something about the way Zoe said it made Lena feel like she had no choice. "Where are we going?" Lena asked, feeling a little scared. "You'll see," Zoe said, pulling Lena toward the back of the school. "It's important." Lena's mind raced. She felt a shiver run down her spine. She looked around, but no one seemed to be watching. Zoe led her around the corner, where the school's playground equipment was hidden from view. Suddenly, Zoe stopped and turned to face Lena. "I have to show you something," Zoe said in a low voice. "But you can't tell anyone. Not even your mom." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Zoe looked around, then pulled out a small notebook from her pocket. "This is a secret," Zoe said. "I've been keeping it for a long time." Lena stared at the notebook, feeling both curious and scared. "What's inside it?" she asked. "You don't need to know," Zoe replied. "Just don't talk about it. It could be dangerous." Lena didn't understand, but she felt a sense of dread creeping up her back. She knew she should tell someone, but she didn't want to make Zoe angry. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Zoe and the notebook. What was it? Why did Zoe want to keep it a secret? She thought about her mom's warning earlier that day, "If anything strange happens, you tell me." Lena knew she had to tell her mom. But what if Zoe got mad? What if Zoe didn't want anyone to know? The next day, as Lena walked to school, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen. She told herself to stay calm, but deep inside, she felt the fear growing. At school, Lena tried to act normal. But every time she saw Zoe, her heart raced. Zoe kept glancing over at Lena, and Lena could feel the weight of the secret hanging between them. Lena couldn't take it anymore. During lunch, she grabbed Mia by the arm and whispered, "I need to tell my mom." Something's wrong with Zoe. Mia's eyes widened. What's going on? Is Zoe being mean to you? I don't know, Lena said, shaking her head. But I feel like something is wrong. I have to tell my mom. That afternoon, after school, Lena went straight home. Mrs. Wilson was busy in the kitchen, but Lena couldn't wait. She ran up to her mom and blurted out everything. Mom, Zoe is acting really weird, Lena said. She has this notebook, and she said I can't tell anyone. She made me follow her to a secret place behind the school, and I don't know what's going on. Mrs. Wilson stopped what she was doing and turned to face Lena. Lena, she said softly, I think it's time we check on you at school. The next day, Lena's mom arrived at the school early. She wanted to see for herself what was happening. But when she walked into Lena's class, she was shocked by what she found. Zoe was sitting in the back, her eyes locked on Lena with an intense look. Mrs. Wilson could feel something strange in the air, just like Lena had described. Hello, Mrs. Wilson, the teacher, Mrs. Brown, said cheerfully, greeting her at the door. What brings you here today? I'm just here to check on Lena, Mrs. Wilson said, smiling. I want to make sure everything's going well. Mrs. Brown gave a reassuring smile, but Mrs. Wilson couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Lena sat down at her desk, and Zoe turned to look at her gaze colder than before. I don't like this, Lena whispered to her mom later, during lunch. I know, sweetie, Mrs. Wilson said. We are going to figure this out. Don't worry. But just as they were about to leave for the day, something unexpected happened. Zoe approached Lena again. You can't tell anyone, she warned. If you do, things will get worse. Lena felt a chill run through her as she watched Zoe walk away, knowing that this was far from over. And that was just the beginning. The next day, as Lena sat in class, her mind raced with worries. She couldn't stop thinking about Zoe and the strange warning. If you tell anyone, things will get worse. What could that even mean? Her mom had been right to come to school, but the situation still felt wrong, like there was something hidden just beneath the surface. Lena glanced around the classroom. Zoe was sitting in the back again, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Lena tried not to look at her, but something pulled her gaze back. Zoe had always been quiet, but today, she seemed even more distant, like she was waiting for something. During lunch, Lena joined Mia at their usual spot under the big oak tree. I'm really scared, Mia, Lena confessed, her voice trembling. What if Zoe's right? What if telling my mom makes things worse? Mia looked worried but tried to comfort Lena. But you did tell your mom. That's the right thing to do. You can't keep a secret like that. Who knows what could happen if you don't? Lena nodded, but a heavy feeling still hung in her chest. What if Mia was wrong? What if everything did get worse? As the day went on, Lena tried her best to focus. But Zoe's constant glances toward her made it impossible to relax. Every time Lena looked up, Zoe's eyes were on her, cold and unblinking. It was like Zoe was waiting for something, waiting for Lena to crack. That afternoon, when the bell rang and school let out, Lena and her mom walked home together. Mrs. Wilson could sense something was off, but Lena didn't say a word. She wasn't sure how to explain the strange feelings that were growing inside her. All she knew was that something about Zoe didn't sit right with her. As they reached their house, Mrs. Wilson turned to Lena with a concerned look. Sweetie, we need to talk. I'm going to ask the school to keep a closer eye on Zoe. If something's wrong, we'll figure it out together. Lena felt a sense of relief wash over her. Finally, her mom was taking control. But just as she thought things were getting better, the phone rang. It was the school. Mrs. Wilson answered the phone, and Lena stood quietly beside her, listening. "Hello, Mrs. Wilson." The voice on the other end was Mrs. Brown, the teacher. "I'm afraid something unusual happened today. Zoe, she took something from Lena's desk." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "What? What did Zoe take?" she whispered. Mrs. Wilson covered the phone with her hand and turned to Lena, her expression serious. "It's okay. Just listen." On the phone, Mrs. Brown continued, "It's a small notebook. It was in Lena's desk when I checked. Zoe came up to me and said she found it on the floor. But when I asked her if she saw anyone drop it, she didn't answer. She seemed nervous." Lena's breath caught in her throat. It was the notebook. Zoe had the notebook again. The one she'd kept hidden. The one Lena had seen behind the school. "I see," Mrs. Wilson said slowly. "Thank you for letting me know. We'll be in tomorrow to discuss this further." When Mrs. Wilson hung up, Lena felt like the walls were closing in. Zoe had taken the notebook. And now, her mom knew about it. But what did it all mean? That night, as Lena tried to sleep, her mind swirled with unanswered questions. Why did Zoe want the notebook? What was so important about it? She was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when she heard a soft knock on her door. "Lena." It was her mom's voice. "Yeah, Mom." Lena sat up, trying to act like everything was fine. Mrs. Wilson opened the door and stepped inside. "Sweetie, I just want you to know I'm here for you, okay? If you ever feel scared or unsure, you can always talk to me. But tomorrow, I'm going to the school to get to the bottom of this." Lena nodded, feeling a little better. She knew her mom would do everything she could to protect her. The next day, Mrs. Wilson took Lena to school early. They walked into the school office, where Mrs. Brown was waiting for them. The atmosphere was tense, and Mrs. Wilson's eyes were sharp as she looked around the room. "I'd like to see Zoe, please," Mrs. Wilson said firmly, her voice steady. Mrs. Brown hesitated but nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Wilson. I'll have her brought to the office right away." Lena sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her stomach twisted into knots as she waited. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but she knew it was going to be important. Minutes later, Zoe entered the office. She was holding the small notebook in her hand, her eyes avoiding Lena's. Mrs. Wilson spoke first. "Zoe, I know you took something from Lena's desk yesterday. And I want to know why." Zoe glanced up at them for a moment before looking down again, her fingers twisting around the notebook. I didn't mean to take it," she muttered. "It was just something I found. Something I needed." Lena's heart pounded. Needed? What was in that notebook? Why was Zoe acting like this? Mrs. Wilson leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Zoe, if there's something going on, it's important to tell us. We can help you, but you have to be honest." Zoe took a deep breath and finally looked up. "It's not just any notebook," she said softly. "It's a journal. A journal of secrets. And they're not just mine. They're yours, Lena." Lena froze. Her secrets. Before Lena could ask what that meant, Zoe continued. "There's a game," Zoe whispered. "A game that's been going on at this school for years. A game where kids who find the notebook get to make the rules. And now that I have it, I can control everything. Even you." Lena's mind raced, and she felt her hands go cold. Was this some kind of joke? Was Zoe just trying to scare her? But Zoe's eyes were serious. "It's not a joke," she said quietly. "And if you don't play by my rules, things will get worse." Lena felt the weight of her mom's hand on her shoulder. "We're not playing any game, Zoe," Mrs. Wilson said firmly. You're going to return that notebook, and you're going to tell us everything. Right now. Zoe hesitated, then slowly handed over the notebook. I didn't want to hurt anyone, Zoe said, her voice breaking. But the game, it makes you do things. Terrible things. Lena could hardly believe what she was hearing. The game. The notebook. What was going on? But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. And Lena knew that whatever happened next, she would need to be brave. Because the game Zoe talked about was just beginning, and the secrets hidden in the notebook were about to change everything. Lena clutched the notebook in her hands, the weight of its secrets pressing down on her. Her mom, Mrs. Wilson, held the notebook tightly, her eyes scanning it for any clues. Zoe sat silently, her eyes downcast, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. We are going to find out what this is about, Mrs. Wilson said, her voice strong. But first, Zoe, I need to understand more. What did you mean by this game? Zoe took a deep breath. It's a game that started years ago. It's been passed down, and whoever holds the notebook makes the rules. You can ask for things, change things, but if you disobey the rules, things get ugly. I thought I could control it. But it's not that simple. Lena stared at Zoe, her heart pounding. The idea of a game controlling her life was terrifying. It felt like a nightmare that had somehow become real. Why did you take it from my desk? Lena asked, trying to understand. Zoe looked up at her, her eyes filled with regret. I didn't want to. I thought if I kept it, I could finally be in control of my life. But all it did was make everything worse. The more I tried to control, the worse things got. Mrs. Wilson nodded, her expression softening. Zoe, it's not too late to stop. Whatever is in that notebook, we can destroy it. We can end this, together. Zoe hesitated but then nodded. Please. I don't want to play anymore. I just want things to be normal again. Lena looked at her mom, who gave her a reassuring smile. We'll end it. This game ends now. That afternoon, they went to the school library, where the principal, Mr. Carter, was waiting. Mrs. Wilson handed the notebook to him, explaining everything Zoe had said. This is not something we can ignore, Mrs. Wilson said firmly. We need to stop the game and make sure no one else gets hurt by it. Mr. Carter, after reading the notebook, nodded gravely. I'll make sure it's locked away, and I'll tell the authorities about it. No one will ever use it again. As they left the school, Lena felt a wave of relief wash over her. The fear, the uncertainty, all of it was finally lifting. Zoe had admitted everything, and they were going to make sure the game was over for good. Later that evening, Lena sat with her mom on the couch. Do you think Zoe will be okay? She asked softly. Mrs. Wilson smiled, wrapping her arm around Lena. I hope so. Everyone deserves a second chance. Lena nodded. She didn't know if Zoe could fully recover from the game's influence, but she hoped she could find peace. As for Lena, she had learned something valuable that day. Sometimes, the scariest things in life weren't the ones we could see. Sometimes, it was the secrets we didn't understand that caused the most harm. But now, Lena knew the truth. No matter how difficult it might be, facing the truth was always the right choice. With her mom by her side, Lena knew she could face whatever came next. The game was over. And Lena could finally breathe easy again.